Hi everyone, welcome to the Startup Operator podcast. I'm Roshan and today I'll be speaking to Akshay BD, who was part of the founding team at Uber India and spent about 5 years there in various roles. He now advises startups on policy and communication. We'll talk to him about all of that and more today on the podcast. So welcome Akshay, thanks for being on the podcast.
Awesome, thank you for having me, Roshan.
Okay, so before we begin, can you help us understand your journey in brief? How did Uber happen?
Yeah, sure. Look, I'm born and brought up in Bangalore. I'm a Bangalore boy. Went to law school because I didn't want to do engineering or medicine, so it was kind of a choice by exclusion. And then I graduated from law school, did 2 months of law, and then realized it's not something I wanted to do because it was very hierarchical, and you're basically pay for some kind of career success with 20 years in court, and then you get to be one of the big dogs, right? As a senior counsel or things like this. I just didn't feel like that trade-off was worth it.
Right.
So I quit. I was with a startup law firm, and they were kind enough to let me, quit my job after 2 months. And I was kind of thinking about what's next. At the time, I was the stand-up scene was taking off, so I was just doing some stand-up on the side to get to pay the bills and make some money and pay rents. And sometime around that, there was a friend of mine who knew someone who was launching Uber at the time. It was her sister, and so she contacted me to help them hire a third person on their team. That typically Uber launched markets with a 3-person team, right? The entire city is launched by. The operations in a city are run initially by a 3-person team.
Okay.
And one person runs the supply side of the business, which is all the everything from driver onboarding to making sure that they're paid on time every week to ensuring all their support problems are resolved that's just one person doing all of that, right? And so and then you have a city general manager who's like the CEO of the city, who manages the P&L of the entire city, and then you have a demand side manager who does all of all new rider marketing, partnerships with various bars and restaurants and things like this in a city when you get it up, customer support, right? So they'd hired the general manager and the driver operations manager. They were looking for a third, and I sent some candidates their way, and some of them worked out, some of them didn't. Eventually I ended up interviewing because I got to know the team long enough, and it was once I met the team, it was very clear to me that this is something special and a little bit more than a taxi company. Yeah. Now, it didn't occur to me that it would be this big, but it was just a fun thing to do at the time, right? To run up a transportation service in a city, like that was the new thing. Ended up interviewing, didn't get the job.
And Uber was a 4-year-old startup at that time, right? It wasn't.
Yeah, 3-year-old startup.
4, yeah.
Yeah, 2013 August. Actually, exactly around 7 years ago today. Right.
Wow.
To the month. Interviewed, didn't get the job because the bar at Uber, the hiring bar was really high, and I was thinking I'm interviewing for a taxi company. This should be a breeze, whatever, right? There's like 6 rounds, and then written round, and then a few rounds of interviews with every step of the managerial chain. Eventually ending with with an interview with the head of Asia at the time. This guy called Alan Penn, who now we're obviously really good friends and stuff, but it just I think I flippantly asked for a different city, and then that was the end of the interview. I didn't get it, so then I kept emailing them, redoing the exercise for the city that they wanted me to be in, which is Bangalore, and then eventually they reached out and said, let's meet. And at the meeting, I went with a presentation of, hey, here's why you should hire me, wearing a suit, because I was a law student, right? I didn't really have a calculus for how startups operate, and startups were not the meme they are today. And the general manager was like, I was going to give you the job, but now I'm having second thoughts. But anyway, he was really nice, and took me under his wing and gave me a job.
Wow, that's pretty awesome. I wanted to talk to you about the 3-pronged approach that Uber takes while opening up a city, right? So one person for demand, one person for supply, and then there's a CEO who's kind of looking after everything. Explain that a little more in detail for us.
Okay, so what is the philosophy of launch was simple, right? What is the minimum number of human beings you need inside a room to launch the service, right? What is the smallest humanly possible sized team that you can, right, to launch the service? And that was kind of the driving philosophy. And so that is obviously just, you need three, right? Uber is actually not a two-sided marketplace. It's actually a three-sided marketplace, right? Because it's a marketplace between the riders, the drivers, and the city. Because a lot of Uber's ability to operate in the city comes down to the city's regulatory frameworks, the city's the way a city moves, right? The distances, travel distances, or the travel patterns in a city are very unique. And so there's a third variable there, which is the city component, which kind of tends to get missed out. But so the way I think about it is the general manager managed the P&L, the people under him or her, and the city, right? They were in charge of the city. There was one person in charge of the driver community, one person in charge of the rider community. That's the least number of people you need in a three-sided marketplace, right?
Right.
So that was the philosophy. And so to be able to do that, you have to have a lot of processes and manual processes that typically would be run by human beings, run by technology, right? Which is why if you look at Uber's expansion, Uber was in San Francisco for between 12 to 14 months, something like this, before going into the second city in the US. And then Uber was in the US maybe for another year. And then fast forward to 2013, we're launching one city every week in the world.
Wow.
Right? So you're just in two countries in whatever, 3 years or like 2.5 years. And then cut to 1 year later, you're in like 100 cities.
So that's enabled by process, enabled by technology. So you have some sort of a template when you launch, basically.
Yes, everything is playbooked, right? So you relegate as much of it as possible to tech. So you never have to rely on human beings to do the things. So if all driver payments were one click, right? Well, not one click, but as close to one click as you can get, right? So there would be a tech process where you just download all the driver data, feed it into a payment system, and do a few clicks, and it would go, and payments would go out. Except now a competitor had a whole payments team to pay out the drivers and account manage them, right? They had a payments team of, at some point, like 20, 30 people that did this.
Wow.
We had one dude from, I was the least qualified person on the team, because these guys were all really, one of them had started a company, this guy called Bhavik, who is the general manager of the business. He'd started a company and was on a break. Mahesh was an early employee of an e-commerce startup, and then also was, I'm Ahmedabad, and I'm like this guy who just graduated from, college, and I really don't know anything about anything, right? And so they were nice enough to give me a job at the time.
Yeah. So I think, the supply side and the demand side are fairly, at least intuitively, people get some sort of it. Talk to us about the city aspect of it, because that's pretty interesting what you mentioned. How does that come into the picture?
Yeah. So the way I think about the city aspect of it is, you have, every city is a unique personality, right? If you look at, I don't know if you followed the early days of stand-up, for example, right? There were the template joke was, oh my God, people in Delhi are so loud, like, that was the template joke.
Yeah.
And and people in Bangalore are very like subdued,
They're always
or
stuck
like
in
people in
traffic or
Chennai.
something.
Yeah, stuck in traffic. And so there's a meme or a cultural meme that is unique to each city, right? Delhi, the food is great, infrastructure is great, people are like, not so great, or whatever the joke lines are, right? And so Bangalore, right, like the that's why you end up having these sub communities of startups in Bangalore. Creative people go to Bombay, really tough, like family businesses, or like tough businesses, right? Businesses that are hard to run are usually in Delhi. And so or bureaucrats and like government or policy space, people who aspire to be in that space, or lawyers, go to Delhi, right? And so there's a culture that shapes the city, and you have to be able to tap into the bloodstream of that culture in order to really build a transportation network for that city. Now, how does that? What does that mean in practice? Well, look, in a city like Delhi, it was very clear that if you launch Delhi, then you need to do it with the best cars in the city. Like, you cannot afford to,
Full swag.
cut corners, right? So you had S classes, BMW 7 Series, like Audis, and you had
Very
all these
impressive.
really, right? And so you had really classy cars that that tapped into the culture of the city. Okay, Bangalore was more about efficiency. So I think Bangalore was one of the first cities to actually launch Uber X, which was a low-cost product, because people really didn't care about that much of the style, right?
It was
And
more
so,
of a
and we can go
commute,
into why the luxury cars were a thing, but that's kind of a functional example.
got it, right? And so aside from that, what were the early challenges like at Uber? Because I'm sure, I mean, people didn't just take to it, immediately, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, the great part was we had an incredible launch team, and this and the you know the launcher for Bangalore was this woman called Swati Prithvi, right? And she was, she's kind of somebody from the HQ at the time, launching, just flew into Bangalore with an American Express credit card and a bag of clothes and said, we're going to launch. And we're kind of looking around going, you one person launches a city. Because imagine, like, when a launcher launches in a city, it's one person, it's just them. They then hire the local team.
Insane.
They then go to airports and onboard cabs and convince people that you can start making money on a smartphone, which is now today a commonplace idea. But can you imagine going back in 2013
Insane.
to
Yeah.
an airport traffic, like a cab lane, and going like, here's an iPhone that costs $400, we're going to give it to you for free. All you got to do is turn it on whenever you like, and then start accepting trips. And here's how you use it. And we'll pay you every week, when the standard for payment was 30 to 45 days, right, in the transportation industry. So it's too good to be true. So like, a lot of it felt like a scam to them, right? So we used to work out of a coffee day, or like some makeshift coffee shop for a while. But eventually we had to get a decent office just so we could host drivers to show that this was a real business.
Right.
Right. So
No, so much of this we take for granted at this point of time, right? I mean, the fact that drivers can use all of these apps, they can figure, how many trips I have to do on a daily basis. How do I pick up someone? How do I get paid? All of these things. But then it's such a significant behavioral change, right? Because nothing like this existed before. So
yeah, I mean, look, it's not so long ago that what was the experience for you, right? You had to pick up the phone, call up a phone
call
number
someone,
of
yeah,
whatever, some call center, and book a cab one day in advance if you wanted to go to the airport.
yeah,
And the minimum, like, time, or like the
half hour minimum,
ETA was about 45 minutes,
yeah,
right? Now, you go from, so you had to kind of, that's one side of the equation. The driver side is, people hire cars for 4 hours and 40 kilometers, or 8 hours and 80 kilometers.
yeah,
That's what cars are used for. If you want to go point to point within the city, you're going to use auto rickshaws, buses, metro, whatever, but not the cars that are currently used on the network
yeah,
in India today, right? So, and they're paid every whatever. They're paid every 30 or 45 days, sometimes 60 days, right? Depends on the client. So there was a behavioral change there that you invest in, right? And so I, I, I don't think anybody knows how it happened. There's a lot of it is emergent. I don't think it was by design. It's just, you just keep hacking at it, and then you build a network, and they refer other drivers, riders refer other riders, right? By the way, we also had riders who had to put in their credit card information into an app, which is very new at the time, right?
yeah, yeah.
When Uber started, there was no Paytm, there was none of this, right? So there's a lot of trust you have to create on both sides of the marketplace, right? And so now that's a whole thing on how to do that. But for us, the top of the funnel for any trust, like, you think of trust as a funnel, and you end up with somebody who comes as a skeptic, and ends up as someone who trusts your service or product. For us, I think, or at least as I look back, the most important thing was to put a shiny object at the top of the funnel. Okay.
To get the
And the
people
shiny object on the right, and the shiny object on the rider side was an E-Class. You push a button, you're outside a bar with some of your friends, and you get a Mercedes-Benz picking you up. That you're going to talk about that for weeks. Not only are you going to talk about it, your friends that just saw you are going to be like, what is this? I want to download this app. Okay. So it doesn't become about, do I trust this app with my credit card anymore? It's about, how do I get my own E-Class? Right? You change the frame with a shiny thing at the top. Now for the drivers, it was not shiny by design. It was just that the only app that existed at the time was an iPhone app, because there was no Android team and all these things. And so the drivers would get an iPhone 4 as a, like, you know, as a means for them to accept bookings. That creates a lot of excitement, and there's a status to owning an iPhone and all these types of things. And so that became viral within the driver community. The E-Class became viral within the rider community, and then it bred a bunch of early adopters who talked about the service a lot. And then once you get the first 100 and first 10 or whatever, right, of your marketplace, then your product has to do the magic, right?
Right. Yeah, I mean, you can only bring people in through the front door, and then after that expect that the product is good enough to keep them, and then build that sort of virality, right? Yeah. So
yeah, exactly. I mean, a lot of Uber's success gets attributed to its people, or its the founder, or like the all these externalities. But frankly, I would say a majority of Uber's success is down to its product market fit, right? The product itself was always oversubscribed in any city that you launched in. So
right.
I would say attributing it to people only is over determining why Uber was successful, but it's also under determining to attribute it only to product market fit, because as you know, there were taxi unions you had to fight, and there were all these weird irregularities in the city that you had to figure out. So I think it tends to be one of the two extremes, the narrative about the success story or whatever, right?
So that's something I wanted to talk to you about as well, right? I mean, in India, there's a lot of unions and stuff like that. So displacing the incumbents is not just like coming with a superior product or something, right? So how do you have to deal with these the unions or the taxi drivers and so on?
Yeah. So I mean, look, again, the idea is to partner with the city, right? This is part of the being able to understand and partner with the city. It's the goal was I think at the time was never like the goal was always to show that the size of the transportation market is growing at a pace that can accommodate every type of transportation product, right? Because what you're competing with is not taxi. What you're competing with is car ownership, right? I used to use the example. I think in the 1800s, people used to own and operate their own electric grids at home, but eventually electricity just became something that you get in your home as a service, right? So the act of owning and operating your own vehicle and maintaining it is a very archaic concept in a world where you can use a smartphone to summon any object from your physical environment, right? Using bits to summon atoms, whether it's food, whether it's Amazon deliveries, whether it's cars, or whatever it is. And so and if you can make it the same cost, why would you own and operate your own thing, right? So it's transportation on tap as opposed to, choosing your own. Now, there's a culture of owning cars for the status and the joy of driving or whatever, right? That's still going to be around, but that's in the long tail. The dominant use case for transportation is just to get from point A to point B.
Believe me, I mean, whatever joy of driving you have, I mean, the commute will kill you, right? I mean, especially in Bangalore, if you have to drive like 5 or 10 kilometers. So that ain't going to happen for sure.
I mean, if you're talking about the joy of driving while living in Bangalore,
we have different definitions.
You're masochistic on some level.
Yeah, absolutely. So the other key element to this whole thing is the government itself, right? And I mean, you have the government banning cabs one day, then you have the government fixing prices one day, then you have the government doing all sorts of random things, right? Because I mean, to be fair to them as well, this is a new business. They're not sure about how to handle this and so on, right? How do you deal with the government in these respects?
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't want to, I don't want to talk too much about Uber because I don't work there, and the approach changes from time to time. But I can say at a high level, the goal is to partner with governments to ensure that the public policy goals they have for their city, can be accomplished with you thriving in the city, right? So a lot of public transportation. So and that's my kind of like 2 cents to any business that has that is dealing with regulatory issues, right? Which is to find a way that your business, like, if your business succeeds, the people on your cap table will make a lot of money. Okay, so that's one way of looking at it. If your business succeeds, like, who are the other people on that cap table that maybe don't make money, but think of it as
Value.
like a value cap table, right? And so who are the people on that value cap table? Is it in Uber's case, it was pretty straightforward. You build a network that carries people around from point A to point B. Eventually you use that network to launch something like Uber Pool, where you put more people in fewer cars. So right? And so if you're both going in the same direction but you don't know each other, then you can digitally match two people to get into the same car as opposed to two different cars. So you reduce the cars, and that helps reduce traffic and congestion and potentially some pollution as well, right? So that is so always find. So I think that the if I had to reduce it to an aphorism, it was like stand for something, not against, right? Or at least when I look back, that was the opportunity for Uber in a lot of cases, right?
So I like. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. No. The other piece is you're going to be fighting incumbents who think it's a zero-sum game, when oftentimes it's probably not. And that's something you have to learn to get really gritty about managing, right?
Yeah.
So we would routinely have taxi union leaders come and break down things in the office. They'd wear black bands, come and protest. And they'll bring local media channels. Once we were doing a driver onboarding, and they came with the local media channels, and there were like 40, 50 people, and they cornered the only two people who were in the office at the time. It was me and Bhavik, who was the general manager, and he didn't speak any Kannada, and I was the only person who spoke some Kannada. And so you get into this funny situation where they basically, they're all in the onboarding room, and we're up against the wall, and they have the news channel, and they're going, tell us you'll shut the office today. Like, tell us that Uber will shut its operations in Bangalore or whatever, right? And they're doing all this in Kannada. So this is weird. So while it's a little bit scary, it's also comical, right? Because I'm translating things he's saying to Bhavik, because he has to make the call. And he's saying, by the way, that if you don't shut the office, I'm going to break your teeth. And I'm translating that in Kannada, right? So I'm translating that. And I don't know what parts to omit, what to keep. And I'm like, this guy's... So... those are some of the...
Did you call Travis by any chance? I mean, hey, Travis, there seems to be a problem with the...
I mean, again, there's a lot of attention on the founder and the things like this, but a lot of these things are just handled at the that's the media narrative of having
a strong founder, basically
a strong founder, right? But a lot of this is just really handled by local teams, because think about it, right? These are people facing these issues at a city level in every city around the world.
Exactly.
In every city, right? So there was 100 cities, right? And so you just figure out you eventually share between each other,
right?
And figure out a playbook to deal with it at your level.
Right. I like what Paul Graham said some time back. I think he said, so Uber is so obviously a good thing that you can measure how corrupt cities are by how hard they try to suppress it.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, damn good.
Okay, really sorry for the interruption. I'm just going to take a minute to talk about something amazing. Clovo helps your remote teams be more productive by helping them close decisions more faster. I've worked remotely for the last 4 months, and it's just a lot of going back and forth on Slack, on email, on Zoom, etc., but never really getting to a point of execution, right? Well, Clogo makes things a lot more simpler. You can have communication contextually around decisions that you want to make. All you have to do is open a thread on Slack like this and continue to talk about what you want to do. With a set agenda, it could be your product roadmap, it could be a marketing campaign, it could be a support ticket, etc. And once you're done, it all syncs with your Slack, and you have all of these decisions accessible when you need it, where you need it, right? Guys, I've tried this out and it makes you super productive. If you're even remotely interested, I suggest you go to clergo.com, that's CLERGO.com, and check it out for yourself. Cheers.
So let's zoom out a little bit, from Uber itself and talk about policy for startups, right? So if you're building a startup that is changing things at a fundamental level, how effective is policy? How effective is working with the government?
You don't want to work with the government unless you really, really have to. So the first rule is don't work with the government, right?
Okay.
That's the rule. And so it's like, unless there's no way for, okay, look, it was very clear Uber was going to be successful once it launched in a city, right? Like I said, our best employee was the product market fit, right? Everybody else was just in service of the best employee. But and that curve looks like this, and you just have to do nothing stupid to stop it, right? Right? You don't have to do anything great to keep it going. You just have to do nothing really. You just have to stop yourself from making poor decisions. That's it, and then it'll keep going. Now, the only thing in that business was regulations. So if there was a way to stop you from having a certain number of vehicles on this road, or all these types of regulations you're talking about, like there were some pretty crazy ones back in the day, where I think in Germany you cannot have you can't have a vehicle pick you up. So if a vehicle picks you up and drops you up somewhere, they cannot then go and pick up some other passenger right after. They have to go back to the garage.
Oh, wow.
And then go pick up the next passenger. It's called the return to garage rule. Okay. In India, actually, the vehicles that you see, they were, there was, the big opposition was they cannot be used for intra-city transportation. They can be used for inter-city transportation, right? Because you're trying to carve out all these market. The reason you do this is because you have to carve, if your transportation market is very small in a non-digital world, you have to carve it out in various ways. So, the auto rickshaw guys can have some, and the local taxi can have some, the intercity taxi can have some. But once you digitize everything, it just balloons the size of the market. And then you don't actually have to do this carving up anymore, because everybody can have enough, right?
Yeah.
So, I don't know if that answers your question. Yeah.
No, that kind of makes sense. I mean, so I can't think of two more drastic opposites, right, between startups and governments. So governments are extremely bureaucratic, process-driven, a lot of red tape, and then startups just run like hell, right? So yeah, I mean, on point on that.
Yeah, I mean, if it's stopping your growth, if this is getting impacted, it's going like that because of some government regulation, that's when it's probably the right time to engage, right? And so otherwise I just don't and so policy is for a very tiny sliver of companies. It's not for everyone, right? If your business growth curve depends on government regulation because some part of your marketplace or product depends on regulation, then it's probably a good idea.
Okay. So give us an example of how policy has worked for some of the startups that are just coming up, for example, because you also advise a lot of startups right now. So yeah, if you could share an example.
Yeah. So look, I think, okay, let's see. So one of the interesting types of companies in India right now is gaming. I'm really, it's something I'm really excited about, because mobile gaming will be I think, eventually end up being the portal to a lot of other things like education and,
Yeah.
uh, oh, you may have to edit this. Sorry.
No, that's okay. So you're essentially
Uh,
saying everything will be gamified, basically, right? So every
no, yeah,
experience will be
no,
gamified.
yeah. Okay. So one interesting example is gaming, right? In gaming, you of course, right now it's mobile gaming, and that's taking off as is. That's the first version of this world where you play games against your friends, potentially for some money, right? That's the first version of this. But I think it eventually gaming will become the UI to a lot of other things like education, for example, right? And this
Right.
is the gamification economy or whatever. But I think it's actually happening now. So I find that really interesting. So one of the companies I helped hire on their policy communications and legal team, which I view that as a bundle, right? It's policy, comms, and legal. Why is that? Well, comms or communication is you manage the court of public opinion. Policy is you manage the court of private opinion, which is government stakeholders mostly, right? The court of public opinion is Twitter, news, anything that people are reading, right? And then the law is the court of law, right? And so ideally, you want to arrest an issue in the court of public opinion. You want to get your voice out there, so it doesn't become a problem that's big enough that the government has to then deal with it, right? If you win in the court of public opinion, you automatically win the court of private opinion. If you lose in the court of public opinion, you will then be relegated into the court of private opinion,
Right.
where governments are like, you're doing this and this is potentially illegal or it's outside the law or whatever, right? You lose the court of private opinion, then you go to a court of law because that's your only result, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of like a risk funnel.
Right.
So one of the companies was MPL that I helped them hire their policy and comms folk, and it was a blast working with them. Right, I really like Sai. He has a vision for what he has a very simple vision for what gaming will be, and his whole thesis back then was that games are a commodity, distribution is the moat, and so he built kind of an app that was a Netflix for gaming of sorts, where you can have a bunch of games launch on a single app, as opposed to having to download whatever, like Angry Birds for once, and you can. I think this really dates me with my game references, or like PUBG for another, right? Okay, so that's an example of a business that's kind of like interesting regulatory wise, because if you're exchanging money for winning a game, then you can do that as long as it's a game of skill and not a game of chance.
Yeah.
If it's a game of chance, it's potentially gambling. If it's a game of skill, that's okay, right? So I work with them because to help fast track and launch their chess product.
Okay.
Right. So because you want to show the power of the platform, right? And they were already launching. This is just going through the product roadmap and saying, what are you doing in your product roadmap that makes it abundantly clear that these are all games of skill, which they were. It's just what's that one thing, right? And we found chess, and we're like, hey, are you willing to fast track it? And this is where a great, this is what separates good founders from great ones, right? It's like they can adapt really quickly to new information. They built out the game product. Both Shubham and Sai on like this, fire drill timeline. And then we launched it with Vishwanathan Anand, right? As the announcing the competition. And in fact, the people who won, two of them were grandmasters out of the top three.
Wow.
Right? They were young, 18, 19-year-old kids. And so it was really awesome to see that. So that's an example of how you can demonstrate what your product does to a stakeholder group like the government. It's like, don't tell me, show me.
Yeah.
Right.
Fantastic. So you've been in startups for about 7-8 years now, right? You're based in Singapore at this point of time. How has the startup ecosystem changed in the last 7-8 years, and how would you contrast that with where you are right now?
Oh man, I don't know about ecosystem because I really didn't get involved much in this. I find the ecosystem bit really strange, because if you're really involved, if you're in a startup, right, then your head's down working on that company at that time with that team. And you don't really have time. Like I didn't do any, one of the things I really regret is not tweeting enough, because there were so many fun things that were happening. When I look back now in the early days of that, it would be nice to have a record in real time when they were happening, right? So I don't know that I have views on an ecosystem. I think that an ecosystem is basically a way of saying, that it's basically people who are enamored by the idea of a startup over the specific company itself. Like I didn't do startups because startups were fun. I did this because Uber at the time was the most interesting thing I could find to work on. And so I'm not interested in startups as much as I'm interested in working on creative projects. So even now when I work with people, startups are a big part of it, but they're not the only, right? Part of it. Like it's a buddy of mine called Jerome Jar. He used to be a star on Wine, the 6-second app, right? And then he went on to co-found an agency with Gary Vaynerchuk, in New York, and then eventually quit that life to go do humanitarian work called Love Army, in Somalia, where they basically got together with a bunch of influencers like DJ Snake and all these all these guys, basically started tweeting to Turkish Airlines to fly food into Somalia, because they were the only airline that flew to Somalia, right? And Somalia was having a drought at the time. And they had to get food there. And the mainstream media wasn't covering it, right? And so they basically launched this massive public campaign to get Turkish Airlines to fly food. And finally, Turkish Airlines agreed to do it. And they sent 7 cargo planes into Somalia, right? That's not a startup. It's a project, right? But it's super interesting. And I wasn't involved in that, specific one. But then there's they're creating a documentary out of it. So I had a lot of fun jamming with Jerome. We spent 2 months just talking about what the documentary should look like and how one could launch it and things like this. And it's not a startup, it's a project, but that's how I think about work.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of agree, because I think, so this is my 13th year in startups, and the first company that I got into, it was a startup, but I didn't know it was a startup at the time. It was just a small company and doing some interesting work, right? So yeah, I mean, I think that's a reasonable way of looking at things, I feel, because if you do things if you do startups for startups' sake, then it becomes a cliche, right?
Well, I mean, then maybe the people around you aren't fun to work with. Maybe the idea is not the one that's going to win out. So you're just going to have, your days are going to look really bad. I guess is it fair to say that there's a status now you work at a startup?
Yeah, there's this whole lifestyle attached to that, right? So
I think it's only a Bangalore thing, right? Or is it an India thing?
I'm not sure. I mean, I don't know enough, to be really honest. I mean, I know the Bangalore ecosystem fairly well. As in, I mean, I see the cliche, right? So, like you step into a WeWork or you step into one of those places, and then you have all of these kids like doing really cliched stuff, right? So, for example, I didn't have foosball machines in the startups that I worked at,
Yeah.
So it was way too expensive, man. I mean, it was like, you'd rather put that cash in marketing, for example, right? So.
I mean, I think people, it's a sense of belonging, right? I think the role of religion has reduced in our society. The role of family has reduced. And so we've atomized as individuals. And so you're looking to be a part of something that has some kind of higher purpose or meaning. And so a lot of the ecosystem talk is actually looking for that sense of belonging. Now, that's okay, right?
Yeah.
So now it's okay if you're doing it for that. But if you expect, you should just not confuse that with financial outcomes that are outsized, which tends up being a lot of the reason why the startup thing is a meme now as well, right?
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. I think we could spend a whole podcast talking about that, actually.
Yeah.
So, so the other thing is that, I mean, you write a lot, and you publish your thoughts and stuff like that. I want to talk to you about a few of the ideas that excite you at this point of time. What are like 2 or 3 ideas that you're super excited by?
Okay, so I think that I really believe in distributed organizations, or what I like to call distributed creative organizations. Okay, let's talk about what that is.
Is that
Uh,
sort of like remote, or I mean, you mean something
yeah,
different?
so everybody, I think that the post-COVID era meme is remote work being a thing, and
Yeah,
that's true, and that's fine. But why would it make sense in a world where everyone's remote for you to hire an employee, right? The difference between an employer and a freelancer is you hire an employee because you want to, you want this person to get institutional knowledge of your company, get to know the people they're working with, come into an office, have some accountability. Okay. And in a pre-marketplace era, it was hard to uh, hard to just hire freelancers. Where are you going to find the search cost for hiring the perfect person was very high
yeah,
for the project. So you just hired one person and then they worked on a bunch of projects.
yeah,
The search cost is massively minimized now. One, because of the internet, but two, because of remote work, because now everyone's remote. So the benefits of
yeah,
having an employee are not there anymore,
yeah,
right? So I'm really excited about this, about high quality freelance work being
yeah.
available, right? So I think people who get really good at doing something in a company should not go look for the next opportunity inside a company.
So
Instead,
yeah.
yeah.
No, sorry. I was just going to add to that, right? So I had this theory a couple of years back that the 10x coders or the really, really good people will start like acting like Hollywood actors, right? They'll hire perhaps like an agent to manage their gigs or whatever it is. But hey, I mean, why should I work for some company in Bangalore if I'm good enough to like code for, some company in the Valley, for example, and make 10 times the money,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's a cultural shift that will come because of the
Yeah,
virus situation, right?
yeah,
Um, and so that's something I'm very bullish on, excited about. This is what I'm working on as well, right? For the first thing I did after I quit my job was to go set up a company without the intention of ever hiring an employee. So my company is called the Art Project. It's based in where I am now in Singapore, and that company is a vehicle for me to express my relationships with a bunch of the external stakeholders. Right? They may be companies, they may be individuals. Right?
right.
Um,
It's a legal
that
entity.
it's a legal entity that is a way for me to contract with uh, companies, individuals, organizations. Right? So
So is there a
that's something I'm
is
very
there a
excited about.
sorry, I wanted to talk to you about that. Is there a larger aim
Yeah.
to that, or is just that you find what's exciting, you do that project, and then you move on to another one?
Yeah, it's so, look, I think there's a little bit of an artistic gene that I bring to my work, and I've always had it, right? Because of and 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 art is a beautiful thing, which is one, you can make it, and once it's made, it's done.
Hmm.
You now have to make a new piece of art, right?
Right.
And each project is a self-sufficient unit, as opposed to working in a company where you're working on several projects. You don't own a lot of them, you own a little bit of some of them, and it doesn't make sense to me that the only way to work is to do it within an organization. Okay, because I think what will eventually happen is, right now I'm doing this model where a founder, for example, this wasn't easy, right? So I'm really thankful to people like Kunal Shah, for example, who set me up with first working with Cred, giving me the opportunity to try this when this was nothing, right? There was no idea. I was just like, I just quit my job and said, look, I don't really, not looking to be an employee, but I feel like I can help, but I don't want to be an advisor. I kind of want to be an operator inside the company. So, he said, okay, you know what? Here's a pass to my company. Come work, do whatever you want. Here are the few problems I have. I want them solved at the end of the day. I want to hire a general counsel who I help them hire and stuff. But he basically gave me carte blanche to do what I wanted, right? In hiring, in policy, in legal, or whatever. So that was very helpful. So when people like that help, and then MPL happened, and then bounce happened, right? And so I got to work with a lot of these founders on building their policy comms and legal teams. And so then it became clear to me that the way to do it now, now the way I do it is simple, right? I go in and say, okay, I'm going to hire the team for you. I'm going to help train them with whatever I think is useful. We're going to build out a strategy for the company that is 1 year looking, and then I'm going to leave. So my goal is to make myself as redundant as fast as possible, as opposed to in a company where you're trying to be as relevant for as long as possible.
Yeah.
Right.
Pretty interesting.
So that there's just a mind shift difference there. And what it allows me to do is put my time up for the best, for somebody who will benefit the most from my unique experience and skills, which I won't have the opportunity inside a company.
Right. So a couple of things really appeal to me from what you're saying. So one is you still have skin in the game. You're vested about, the company's success, obviously, right?
Yeah.
And two, I mean, you're not bogged down by all of the other stuff that you have to deal with within a company, right? I mean, there's a lot of bullshit, right? Aside from your core work that you have to deal with. So, yeah.
I mean, look, I've come to learn that the stuff that we call bullshit is really important, especially after the experience at Uber. Right?
Yes.
All the admin stuff, HR stuff, those are all really important things.
Yeah.
But sure, do I want to deal with them? Probably not. And this allows me to sit out of that, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of like a cheat code.
Yeah.
So I think that's interesting. The next iteration of this will basically be, look, we got to go. I mean, there's a company I already did some work with, but I can't talk about it, right? But it looks something like this. It's like, we got to go launch this business in a new geography.
Okay.
We can hire somebody to go do it, but we need 4 people. We need somebody who's really good at early marketing for a specific type of, early marketing for a fintech app. Okay. Right. We need somebody who's really agile on regulatory stuff. We need a really good P&L manager. Okay. And we need someone who has established banking connections. Let's say that's the problem. That's what you're doing. Now, you can hire all these 4 people. It's going to take you months to do it. Or you can give me a call and say, look, I need these specific people. Right. If you're able to assemble an on-demand project team, it's kind of like, have you seen Ocean's 11? It's like, it's like you go and recruit a bunch of people for the specific heist.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
It's that job. You're recruiting for that project.
Yeah.
Right. And so you can be really specific about what you want and who you want to hire for that. And so eventually what happens is once you bootstrap this network of independent solopreneurs, right? Then you can find ways to coordinate and organize them for individual projects. Like a friend of mine, for example, has a standing invitation from an African country's president to come and build out a beach town because they don't have a lot of tourism. So they want to invite people to come and be tourists in this country, which doesn't have a lot of great PR. And he's like, you can come and how are we going to, you're going to need architects, you're going to need influencer marketers, you're going to need, people who can host a, whatever weekend pop-up. You're going to have these people that need a diverse set of skills. So for me, the North Star is, can we build a network where if tomorrow you call me and said, we're going to go and start a beach town in this African country, we need to hire the following 40 people to make this happen.
Sounds pretty cool.
Then you should be able to go find those 40 people, minimize the search cost and time, assemble a team, get on a flight, land there, execute the project over 6 to 12 months, whatever it is, wrap it up, and then you kind of go and do your next thing, right? So that I think that's what it will eventually become. But you need enough solopreneurs for that. You need enough people who are willing to take that leap. And so a lot of my time is also spent on recruiting really talented people that I meet into potentially going freelance. And freelance has this kind of like weird, bad branding right now, but I think that's going to change soon.
Yeah. No, I think a few years back, I'm not sure, I mean, maybe 3 or 4 years back, this Reid Hoffman wrote this book, which was actually a PPT that started as a presentation called The Startup of You, right? Where he basically argued that, look, I mean, the days of 20, 30-year employment is gone, right? It's out of the window, died with your parents' generation. You have to think of yourself as a startup, right? And be agile and not be tethered to one thing per se, right? Um, and I think,
Exactly.
yeah, so if you look at the whole remote lifestyle now, people are, I mean, I won't say, I mean, they're digital nomads as such, but I mean, they're willing to take those chances on like 12-month or 14-month projects, right? Would I, like, for example, I know a friend of mine who is a researcher, right? And he has spent over the last 10 years, he has spent maybe 12, 14 months in places like New Zealand, France, England, etc. And he's just done these gigs, okay? Uh,
Yeah,
so I
exactly.
yeah, so I find that super interesting. I mean, is that like a stable lifestyle, so to speak, with a wife and kids? Maybe not, but then I mean, there are certain people who might be more beneficial to. I mean, it might be more beneficial to certain types of people, right? That kind of lifestyle.
Well, look, I think you don't need, I mean, this will evolve just like regular jobs have
Yeah,
evolved. You get these managerial structures which will allow you to be in a city and
yeah,
coordinate projects remotely. Because
yeah,
being able to manage a project remotely is going to become a really scarce, it's a scarce skill. It's not something everyone can do,
yeah,
right? It's not easy. It's not, there's a lot, the God is in the details in some of this stuff,
yeah,
right? And so that will become a skill set. I think eventually people will graduate to
yeah,
being able to be in the same city while being able to execute projects in far off
yeah,
locations,
yeah.
right? You're using bits, your computer, to kind of
Move
direct
people around.
atoms, which are
Yeah,
human beings in a different
yeah,
part of the world, right?
yeah,
So that's a thing. So yeah, this is one thing I'm really excited about. The other, and I try to focus my attention on as few things as possible. That's one of the things I'm learning now. It's something we had even culturally at Uber, but I think that I picked up from there. But even more so now, where I may have access to, um, because startups are so many now, and there's a lot of opportunities. I need to be really careful, right, in being able to, if you
yeah,
do too many things, you're doing none of them well. And so I spend a lot of my time on this. The other piece I spend a lot of my is food tech, right? And so it reminds me a lot of the early days of ride sharing, for example. Or actually, okay, in terms of stage, it reminds me of the early days of ride sharing, because there are all these cloud kitchen wars and these
right,
delivery wars and all of these things. In terms of an industry, and it looks to me exactly like e-commerce was, say 20 years ago, or um, a
yeah,
a content was 10 years ago, right?
right,
So we can go into that if you like, but
yeah.
to me, that the next 10 years are, you wouldn't waste your time spending it in this neck of the woods. You have to find the right idea and the right company or whatever it is. But
So
I
give
think there's
us
a lot of,
Yeah, so give us your quick take on food tech. I mean, what do you think will happen? Will industrialized kitchens and services become like the norm? Because I mean, if you told me, let's say, if you told me even 15 years back that default everything would be ordered on Amazon, I would be optimistic because, of course, I mean, I would love that, but then I wouldn't think of that as reality. Do you think that would, I mean, we'd ever reach that stage with food tech as such?
yeah. So I mean, look, I think uh, it's it, it's fascinating, because there's so much around food tech. Like, what is food tech, right?
Yeah,
Let's describe it from a customer experience. What's likely to happen is, we have a kitchen in our homes
yeah.
today because a lot of people cook, right? If you can turn this into a service, you can reduce the size of your kitchen, increase the size of a dining room. In smaller apartments, you can literally replace the kitchen with a dining room. Okay. The way you would do that is, today you may be ordering 1 or 2 meals a week, maybe more. 60%, I think, in the US, 60% of Americans order at least once a week, something like this. But that market is growing, right? Because it's going to get cheaper and easier and better for you to order in than to go to the grocery store and cook the meal yourself,
Yeah,
right? I think it's going to get, you only had that luxury with fast food. I think it's going to be now ubiquitous with all kinds of food, including
yeah,
healthy options that you'll have, right? So assume you're able to have the experience you can, that's just as cheap, just as much more convenient than cooking your own food,
yeah,
and just as healthy, right? That's the promise of food tech for the consumer. Okay. Now on the back end, there'll be like several billion-dollar companies built to make this happen. Because the way you order in today is from a restaurant. In fact, the next post I'm posting is on the infrastructure piece of it, right? Which is today the way you order in is you go. All these restaurants are operating in locations that are really expensive because you know why? Well, because you need a high foot traffic for the business model to make sense. You get high foot traffic in commercial places where the price of real estate is really high.
Yeah.
Okay. So when you order food, that's where your food is coming from. And the rent and the people you need to manage that operation is all getting baked in.
Yeah. You're paying for a lot more than food.
Right. Exactly. Right. Now you look at an alternate world where you take where those atoms or that building need not be in high footfall because you've taken the footfall that's physical and relegated into the digital world. You're now, you can produce digital footfall. So you don't need the physical footfall anymore. So you just take a really fallow real estate building that's in, maybe a mile away or a couple of miles away from that prime real estate area, but services the same neighborhood.
Right.
At 1/5 the cost of rent, right? And that's where you get these ghost kitchens or cloud kitchens, right? So one of the articles I'm writing now is featuring, I thought it'd be cool for people to see where their food is going to get made in the coming years, right? So I wrote to some former employees who are now former colleagues who are now in cloud kitchens, the company, and I said, hey, would you guys be open to me featuring one of your facilities? And they were nice enough to give me a virtual tour of a facility. Nice. And how we take pictures. And so it's basically a picture post, right? And when you look at something like this, you think about how much work has gone into imagining a world,
right,
where that can happen, right? There are separate worker refreshment areas. There are common storage areas where you can deploy IoT devices so that the food that's maintained, you have a real-time 24/7 dashboard of the quality of that food, right? As opposed to once in 3 months or once in 6 months or whatever the health inspection timelines are. Different cities have different things. So we're going to enter a world where that is really interesting to me. And then who's going to be inside them? Local restaurants. They're just going to move inside them. By the way, I don't know how well your audience is familiar with these kitchens. I just described them as if they know. But basically what a cloud kitchen does is it's a building packed with 20 to 30 kitchens, right? Modular kitchens that have equipment that are custom made for that restaurant's needs. Somebody may need a fryer, somebody may need an oven, right? Yeah. So the 30 kitchen, it's like a co-working space for restaurants, right? And then those are kitchens, and then there are common areas like WeWork, you have common areas, right? So there are common areas to store your food, for dry storage, for cold storage. There's a common worker refreshment area where people can meet each other, hang out. But it's basically a co-working space for restaurants.
Yeah. No, I can't wait for that to be a reality, right? Because so the way I look at it, I think we are past the eBay era for food techs. You remember the eBay era with the e-commerce as such? Very random sort of I would say still magical at that point of time that you could order online and so on, right? And then I think we're entering the Amazon era with the whole supply chain logistics and stuff. And the way I look at it, for the consumer, it's like cheaper, faster, better, right? But I'm more excited on the supply side, right? Because as a supply side person, as a restaurateur right now, it's not just enough for me to be a good cook. I need to know how to run a business at this point of time, right? But now with cloud kitchens, that's out of the window. I can just go do my cooking and come back, right?
Exactly.
So you will find, I think, a lot of people doing it because I think the failure rate in restaurants is like 40%, 60% within a year or something of that sort. Some really crazy number, right?
Yeah, in places like New York, I think it's like 80%, something like this.
It's insane. I mean,
in the first 3 years.
Even in Koramangala, right? So if you walk up and down Koramangala, the scene looks always different. There's always new things there.
Yes.
So yeah.
And that's actually very healthy and fine. It's just, what is the cost per failure, right? What is the cost of a failed restaurant concept?
Yeah.
Today, it's like, in Singapore, I think if you go rent a place, it's going to cost you like $500,000 all in, right? You first sign a 1-year lease for a commercial place, you hire staff, you rent all this equipment, and then you start. That's your startup cost.
Yeah.
But you go to like if you rent a virtual kitchen, then you're walking into a facility, into a co-working space that has everything you need. It's exactly the office space thing. You want to hire your own office furniture,
Yeah.
but you just want to rent a WeWork, right? So you go in, and it's, I think today you can do it for as little as I want to say $60,000, compared to $500,000, right? So it's, you can quickly spin up a restaurant concept and try it, right? So that will increase the metabolism of business, of restaurant concepts. So we'll get all kinds of interesting chefs liberated from managerial. Right? Well, actually,
awesome.
not just having to run a business, but think about all the chefs who have all these interesting concepts and ideas that their managers or their CEO of the restaurant won't let them do, because, well, it's not this happens all the time, right? Where the creators are not, and so because in their mind it's not profitable, or it's not the right time, or what all these things. Now, guess what? You have an easy way to try it, right? And so I wrote this post basically saying restaurants are closing for business but opening for art, right?
Wow, nice.
And so that's what's happening. You're going to get a lot of artists who are basically chefs, try various concepts, dishes, fusion. You're going to get cuisines we didn't even know existed.
So in a lot of ways, I feel the world is moving towards enabling creation without friction.
Yes.
Whether it's solopreneurs, whether it's indie makers, whether it's like individual like restaurateurs, as we were talking about, right? So I think in a previous world there was this one person or entity that owned the distribution, right? And that entity is becoming slowly more and more redundant, right? It's true of it'll be true of people in the food business, for example, with cloud kitchens. It's certainly true of media, right? We can we can talk about media as well, what's happening right now, where
exactly.
literally, like the whole Substack phenomena, right? You recently had this journalist Barry Weiss, I think, who quit the New York Times, and she might start a Substack, and there are similar people who are doing that. It's like, hey, why the hell should I write for the New York Times when I can take about, I don't know, even 1,000 or 10,000 people of 10,000 of my favorite, my fans as such, people invested in my work, who now can read just what I write and pay for what I write, and I just keep writing. That's it, right? So I don't bother about the business aspects of it. I just create.
Exactly, right? So you won't. That's the thing. It's like you need for somebody to. I think of it as a left brain and right brain, right? So the right brain is creative, left brain is analytical. A lot of people are right brain heavy, but don't have the left brain skill sets of running a business. And so this is liberating the right brain from an employee to an entrepreneur, right?
No, even
and so that's exciting.
Yeah, so even for someone who let's say who's reasonably good at the stuff, right? I mean, there's a lot of bullshit, for lack of a better word, that someone has to do, right? Like incorporating a company, hiring people, etc., etc. So one of the things I wanted to ask you also, I mean, since you mentioned it so many times, right? Hiring. So what is your mantra for hiring? Do you have a mantra for hiring, or I mean, what are some common attributes that you look at?
Sorry, what does it mean to have a mantra?
As in, I mean, do you have a framework for hiring?
How
do you hire great people?
Do you mean like what I look for when I want to work with people?
Yeah, when you hire
is
people.
That? Yeah. I don't really have a unique take on that. I think the Buffett criteria
intelligence
kind of works, right? High energy, high intelligence, and high integrity, right?
Okay.
And I just borrow that framework for the most part. Now, tactically, there might be certain, like I look for any evidence of hardship. Okay. And if they have, like a lot of creativity or a lot of like original thought is born out of some
Right.
mild traumatic experience, right? Where you become, Eric Weinstein had this thing where he said, for most people, social reality is good enough, right? You have a stable family, you have a good job, social reality works for you. But for some, something happens and social reality caves. And they realize, oh my God, the world doesn't work in any way that I was told it does. And right. And so, and then you become very truth seeking, just as a self-defense or a self-preservation mechanism. So trauma makes people, it's like, it's like your immunity system, right? You get a cold and you get strong, your immunity builds over time. So truth is just another name for immunity, right? So can you see the world for exactly the way it is, or is it colored through some bias or some wishful thinking, right?
Yeah.
So that to me is that's an important thing to me. Also, people who have gone through some hardship are less entitled, so it's just easier to work with them.
Yeah, absolutely. They don't take shit for granted, for sure.
Yeah.
So
you kind of have an unhealthy attachment to your work, right?
Yeah.
So
obsessive.
which is good in certain quantities. I think it's really like, you look at all the great work that's been produced. They're produced not by people who are very well put together, right? Like all these great entrepreneurs are kind of marginal characters.
I just started watching The Last Dance, and I can't agree more. So yeah. So hey, we're nearing the end of the episode. I want to ask you a few quick fire questions, right? So the best quarantine hack that you've discovered, quarantine or lockdown hack that you've discovered.
So to do what?
Anything, personal, professional, whatever, to get stuff done.
Okay. Take Zoom calls not on your laptop. Okay. So then it's like you will not have Zoom fatigue. The reason you have Zoom fatigue is because you feel like you're constantly looking at yourself look so bad on a Zoom call. And that just produces this. I think that's what the Zoom fatigue is. I don't think the Zoom fatigue is I think that's whatever. Like, I think that's an interesting thing. So I have I use my laptop, but I also have a separate device for taking calls.
Right.
It just makes it easier. It makes me feel like I have my own office.
Right.
It's a psychological thing.
Right.
What's the other? I don't know. Develop a ritual, I guess.
Yeah.
Like I haven't I don't want to say things that sound like a fortune cookie thing. So I'm trying to avoid it. Like I started running, right?
Yeah.
Right. And that's been fun. That's been de-stressing.
Right. Okay. What books or podcasts would you recommend?
To do what?
Anything. Just general life outlook.
Oh man, that's a broad question. Okay, well, for there's a product timing fit, right? It's not just product market. So for the times we are in, if you haven't already read the book, The Sovereign Individual, that's a great book. I would do it yesterday, right? If you want to make sense of the world we're entering, this book was written in 1998, right? But it feels like it was written last year. They make a lot of predictions about the future and what the internet age will bring. And a lot of that is really feels like, it feels prophetic almost. It's a great book, right? It's a great analytical framework to think about the time we're going to go into.
Right. Okay, so to end the podcast on, let's talk about what are you optimistic about going forward? This year has been, I don't know, some describe it as a black swan event, some describe it as a reset of, to how things were and so on and so forth, right?
Yeah.
So what are you really optimistic about going forward?
I'm optimistic about creative people being liberated from the clutches and the tyranny of location, bad managers, bad organizations, and achieving escape velocity from these things to become their own.
Wow, that's a super optimistic and profound note to end the podcast on. Hey, this was a fun conversation, man. Thanks so much for making the time. Really, really appreciate this.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks everyone
Really
for
appreciate it.
tuning in. The podcast is going to be available on all popular platforms. If you like this episode, then don't forget to subscribe and share. Until next time, stay safe and take care.
See ya.